I just realized back in the day, way back like when PlayStation was in its height, I wouldn't have had something like a platform where you had like status updates on Facebook where you can talk to all of your people at the same time and everything and launch a bulletin to all of them at once and everything. The same way that, I do now with respect to things, and it makes it easier to get, eyeballs on what it is that you have to say in a lot of ways and all at once in a way that I wouldn't have easily been able to do that back when I was, much younger. Anyways, just as a perspective on video gaming, my vantage point on it, I just wanted to say, I would not necessarily have looked fondly, for instance, on Halo coming over to the Xbox. Now, to me, I would have looked at that and thought, it's pretty. They've got a pretty big group of people that seem to really love this one, but it's not for me. Would have been the reaction that I would have had seeing it go over there on Xbox. But I think what's so key to my own frustration at seeing what's going on at Sony with the Concord failure, with the failure of all these live service projects, and with project failing after failing after failing, and the alienation of the first person, the one player games that are starting to disappear, and everything, and the anger felt by the Bloodborne franchise, and everything, and all that stuff. So, when I talk about the way that I'm angry, I will just say this, I, in a lot of ways, never got the chance to say back in the day that I would buy something like the PlayStation 1 because the PC landscape had turned into a cesspool of Doom clones. And that the only kind of games that people that were targeting PC gamers seemed to be interested in making were games that were first-person shooters. And that I didn't want a first-person shooter, I wanted an RPG. I wouldn't have been able to come up there on the stage and say that, but now I can in today's era. But now I'm alienated and pissed off. I mean, the whole problem is that Sony no longer has anything to offer me. Nintendo does what Sony is refusing to do. So Nintendo makes has Studio Asano making the kind of games that I actually want to play with them, and that would be Creative Business Unit 2 at Square Enix, specifically, and my frustration, looking out there at that world that's going on there at Sony is that, like, what do I notice about Concord? It's a shooter. What do I notice about Marathon? It's a shooter. What do I notice about almost all of these live service projects? They're all shooters. I mean, if you fail to meaningfully distinguish yourself from the PC landscape by making the kinds of games that only used to be available on the PC landscape, and then that's the only kind of games you make, what? I gotta ask myself, like, why would I waste my time on you? You're making games, right? Okay, great. They're not the kinds of games that I want to play. I'm not going to. Anyways, I feel, with respect to Sony, abandoned. Neglected and left out to rot, basically. And like I said, I mean, that, when that happens to somebody, they can either accept it or they can get mad and start burning shit down. And I'm kind of more in the burn shit down mode of thinking about it, and I'm not being literal. Please don't start some fires. Don't do that. But you know what I mean? Like, don't start literal fires, okay? That's bad. But yeah, I'm being metaphorical in my language here. But when I look at Sony, like I said, I just I feel the chill, basically in my bones at this point. They don't care, They've this sort of, like, they've decided that they want to do things and to have the creative vision that they have, and they really have no interest in anybody who disagrees with it, and they're not interested in any of that. And so, like I said, I feel abandoned. I feel like this company doesn't care about how I feel. It doesn't care that I disagree with them or that I don't want this vision. It doesn't like the fact that they're losing me. They don't care, you know, and that's really disheartening that it's that way. And my my thoughts about everything and my perspective about all this is just, if I had been able to say anything back in the day, I would have been able to normalize it so that by now it was no big deal for me to say something like this. But I became like, gaming for me kind of started off with us owning like the Atari as a family and their influence, and then we owned the Nintendo Entertainment System and the Sega. And then we went to the Super Nintendo, and then we also got access to the Sega, and then eventually the Sega CD, and then it was the PlayStation for the next era, and then it was the PlayStation 2, and then everybody just sort of dropped off, and then it went back to, I bought the PlayStation 4 at some point and the PlayStation 5, and I gotta say, like, it, just very ignored by them, is the sentiment. And I know there are a lot of people that are upset with Nintendo. Like, Nintendo has done a lot of things I don't approve of. They've certainly been very litigious. Like, they sue people that they really shouldn't sue all the time. As a company, they're very overprotective of their intellectual property, as though they're scared of somebody else making them look bad by using it. That kind of behavior is something that I don't like about Apple. At the same time, they don't let you customize because you might make them look bad through customizations that don't, jive with people that they don't like as much as you do. So they want to have, complete control over it, and that alienates me as a customer. So, you know, um, anyways, but if I had been able to say this 20 years ago, that's what I would have been saying. I've come over to the world of consoles and everything, or I've decided to stay in the world of consoles because the PC gaming landscape has turned into a cesspool of first person shooters and third person shooters that I never asked for and never wanted to begin with. And I would have been able to say that I'm not interested in first person shooters or the PvP experience, and nobody would have batted an eye at it. Nobody would have thought anything of it, or that it was so weird, or anything. It wouldn't sound strange, but now I'm living in this landscape, and now it's going to be like, really? You like these turn-based games and everything, and you don't like these fucking shooters? Yeah. Now I have to come out and say it. We went... I just remember the era, and, when Halo came out on to the Xbox, this would have been kind of like looked at as an unwelcome guest because it's by me, because it's the invasion of a genre of game that I don't want to play onto the console world. Now that world seems to have completely taken over the PlayStation, because PlayStation seems to only be interested in offering shooters. You know, Concord didn't just fail because of the fact that the characters didn't appeal to people. It didn't just fail for any of that shit. It failed in part because it was offering the there were people like me who, maybe would have been interested in something, maybe would have overlooked our distaste for the characters or the way that they felt a little bit cringe at first and thought, you can't judge a book by its cover, let's give it a little bit of time before we start to develop a perspective about it. But it was a fucking shooter. And so we looked at it and we're like, oh, fuck it, let it burn. You know? The alienation that's happened here, really, at the end of the day, is that gaming used to be a world in which there was plenty of room for all of us. There used to be a much more inclusive world on the consoles where gamers who like the diversity of style of video games were all included. And now look at it. The PlayStation landscape is just a bunch of shooters, basically. It's pretty bleak for anybody that doesn't like a shooter.